Welcome to this webinar for today, and thank you for joining in time. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. So I would like to welcome everyone for this webinar, and I take this opportunity to also thank those who have been able to join in time and our presenters from Ghana and Kenya. I will maybe allow just since many people have joined, I'll also maybe allow in the meantime to welcome everybody, and also maybe as we wait for others to join, I can be sharing the Menti to see where members are joining from before we can get welcoming remarks from Susan. Trying to share the Menti. So you could just tell us where you're joining from. The Menti code is on the screen. I hope you can see the Menti code on the screen. Menti meter code is 84, but I can also share the link in the chat. I can share the link in the chat so that it's so the link for the Menti is in the chat, and the code, I hope you can see the code on the screen. So we shall be waiting to hear from you where you are joining us from today. Kindly let us know where you are joining us from as we wait for other participants before we can get welcoming remarks from our colleague Susan. Yeah, thank you. We have colleagues from Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you for joining. We have Rwanda, we have Kenya. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. We are waiting to hear from others. Where are you joining us from today? Yeah, thank you for joining us from South Sudan. Yeah. Kindly use the link in the chat, and the code is on the screen. Yeah, thank you for joining us from Seychelles. Yeah, thank you, colleagues from Seychelles. Yeah, thank you for joining us. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for joining us from Sierra Leone. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we shall also wait for our colleagues as we continue to just for 2 minutes so that we can start with the opening session, welcoming remarks from my colleague Susan. So we shall give it more minutes to see where our colleagues are coming from. The Mentimeter link is in the chat, and the code is on the screen. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, thank you for joining us from Botswana. Yeah, thank you. So I will just now close this session, and then I welcome Susan, my colleague, to give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Really good to see you all. Yeah, and a very warm welcome to the second experience sharing webinar in the Anglophone Africa Transparency Network, which is greatly coordinated by Sheila here. So for those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Susanne Konrad. I'm a project officer at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. And together with my colleague Fatima Sarah, we coordinate the global CBIT GSP project. So CBIT GSP stands for Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency Global Support Program. I guess all of you know by now, but just to remind you. And the project is funded by Jeff and implemented by UNEP and executed by UNEP CCC. And yeah, we provide transparency support to countries in addition to the kind of national CBIT projects and Jeff enabling activities, and the main support is provided through the networks. So here we have the Anglophone Africa Network today. So thanks again for joining. Yeah, so the topic of today's webinar is, as you know, climate finance tracking, which is an increasingly important topic, both for own national planning purposes in countries, but then also for the international reporting in the upcoming BTRs in terms of climate finance received, but also needed. We all know that the needed is a bit more difficult to establish, it's a voluntary item in the upcoming BTRs, but it's still important to provide this information on the international basis. And at the same time, the tracking of climate finance is very difficult. It's complex. It's a comprehensive process that involves the collaboration of many different actors in the country, many different ministries, line agencies, and so on. So it's not straightforward, and it's also methodologically quite challenging, as there's no internationally agreed definition of climate finance yet. So it's difficult to disentangle development from climate finance. We all know that, especially in terms of adaptation. So there are many issues to be solved and many decisions to be made by each country that kind of embarks on the journey of tracking climate finance nationally. There's also no one methodology to follow. So it's a big process. We also conducted a capacity needs assessment in the Anglophone Africa Network at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and we also saw that tracking of support needed and received is one of the priority areas in countries. They're very, very happy to have Kenya and Ghana here today to present their experiences and lessons learned to share with all of us in the network. Many thanks to the colleagues from Kenya and Ghana to join us and be so grateful to share the experience with everyone here today. I think there's a lot to learn as many countries are embarking on this journey of tracking climate finance in their own constituencies. So thank you so much for joining, and really looking forward to this webinar. And I encourage everyone to engage as much as possible, ask questions. We're all here to learn. There are no stupid questions. So please just engage, and really looking forward to it. Back to you, Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for those opening remarks. And now I will just dive into the presentation. Introducing key highlights about finance, climate finance. I hope you can all see my presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. So my presentation, this presentation is about support needed and support received, reporting requirements and best practices in tracking climate finance. It's generally looking at the requirements under the ETF, the framework. So the presentation is mainly trying to summarize the key requirements that are provided for under the Paris Agreement in terms of modalities, procedures, and guidance for Article 13 for Paris Agreement, in terms of support provided and support received by individual parties in the context of climate actions under for Articles 4, 7, 9, and 10 and 11 to the extent possible to provide a full overview of aggregate financial support provided to inform the global stocktake under Articles 14. So specifically, we are aware that transparency framework provides mandatory reporting to all parties for the biannual transparency for every 2 years, except that the CIDs and the least developing countries, which have been granted discretion on the timing for their submission, but still they are encouraged to communicate the support that they have received in terms of support needed and received. So countries are encouraged to provide information under the 4 categories, that is financial, technology development and transfer, capacity building, support needed and received, and then transparency. So the common aspects between the different reporting reports, the national communication, the BUR and the BTR, as you're aware, like I have already mentioned, they are not mandatory for, I think, for all of us here in Anglophone, but we have to take note that we are encouraged to start reporting about them. For instance, under the JG inventory, we have the National Inventory Report, which feeds in the biennial transparency report, but also information to track progress on NDC has some aspects on financial that also have to be reported, and also information related to climate change impacts and adaptation. Chapter 4 are also have some aspects that need to be reported under the biannual transparency report, and specifically chapter 6 on information on support received and support needed is also encouraged to be reported on under the BTR. And all these aspects are also of adaptation are also reported under the BTR. So as you are aware, we are all encouraged to at least report something under the sections. So here, this is trying to elaborate under each category. For instance, financial support is supposed to look into support needed to fulfill the NDC requirements and actions and commitments. And then also aspects on how the support will contribute to NDC and to the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, and also giving some highlights of the description of sectors. And then under capacity building support, it requires that you consider approach to enhance the capacity building support. What approach are you using at national level? And then also capacity building needs, constraints, and gaps in communicating the needs, and how the capacity building will improve such information. And then also highlight some of the processes for enhancing public awareness and participation and access to information related to capacity building. And then case studies can also be used as success and failures, or to document that so that it can inform the gaps for capacity support received, but also capacity needed. And then how support has enhanced capacities should also be reported about. And then, and still under capacity building, support received at national level where appropriate, subnational and regional, including priorities for participation and involvement of stakeholders, should also be reported, because as you're aware, there are so many capacity that is provided by different stakeholders for transparency actions. And then when it comes to technology development and transfer, plans reports are supposed to elaborate on plans, needs, and priorities related to the technology development and transfer, including those identified in the capacity assessment needs, the technological needs assessment. Then also this section should consider needs for enhancement of in indigenous capacities and technologies, and then case studies and successes and failures for some of the technologies that have been supported should also be reported on, and then how the support contributes to the technology development and transfer of indigenous capacities and their know-how. And then the stage of technology cycle supported, including research and development, demonstration, deployment, and diffusion and transfer of technology. Then finally, transparency, of course, support needed and received for preparing reports pursuant to Article 13, of whereby each of the countries have received this support. And then support needed and received for addressing areas for improvement identified by the technical expert review teams. All this information needs to be elaborated on, and we are encouraged to always document it in our reports as part of support. So this table, yes, it is very congested, but it's trying to highlight some of the commonalities between the national communication requirements and the BUR requirements. And I know some countries are still doing this one together, so I will of course share the presentation, but we should always take care of those that are required under financial support needed, and then financial support to receive technological development that are provided for under the national communication, but also where we need to provide updated information in the BUR on some of the constraints and gaps related to financial and technical, and then capacity building. So this table, I think, helps to summarize what is required. And as you may be aware that all these are provided for under the common tabular reporting format. So when it comes to BTR, here I just summarized the key requirements that are provided for in the common tabular format for each of the elements, the 4 elements, the financial, the technological, and the capacity building. They have elements that are related to each other, but we have to ensure that there's no double counting as we do our reporting. So the different tabular formats, they are detailed, but here this is a summary to help us to ensure that we do not have double counting. Then just key take-home points from this, that of course it's not mandatory. The provision for information on support needed and received is still not mandatory for developing countries. As such, it is not a requirement, but countries should strive to report this information at this stage, so that in terms of recognition of effectiveness of support, cross-referencing with support provided, identification of needs and attracting further support. And then also another key point to take home is that the enhanced transparency framework, the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for Article 13 provide much more detail on the relevant information to be reported on, support needed and received, specifically streamlining information between parties, guiding the collection of relevant data, and also, like I had mentioned, there are detailed common tabular formats for each of the 4 elements. But we are also aware that there are challenges in this, and because of the different national circumstances and capacities between countries, including the arrangements to capture the information in terms of how institutions are arranged, especially institutions that are supposed to provide this kind of information, but also the different institutions that are involved in implementing actions. Then there are also differences in uncertainty in definitions and methods that are being used to capture the costs and the support, and also when it comes to maybe support for policy strategies and actions, it kind of becomes a bit tricky to quantify some of those aspects. And then we also have unstandardized data from the different institutions. So how do someone who is implementing actions in from maybe Ministry of Energy submit this kind of support vis-a-vis someone from a different institution. So also we have other challenges like guidance and capacity to assess support needed and support received. So we take note of these points as we try to learn more from the experiences of Ghana and Kenya. So my presentation ends here, and I would like to thank you for listening in. Unless you have any questions. Yes. If you have any questions, if you do not have, we can go to the next presentation. I saw Kenya here, and I know also Ghana is here, so we can listen from one of them. I can get from one of them who is ready. Okay, Irene has a question. Irene, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I hope I have unmuted. Okay. Thank you very much, Sheila, for the presentation and for organizing for this meeting. The point where it is it's not mandatory for developing countries to report support needed or received. Yes, that is true, but as really developing countries, we have always negotiated for financial support. During COPs, we negotiate for that. So it is very critical that we, the developing countries, ensure that we report on that support, and also to identify the areas that we need support on. And it is sort of like an accountability at the international level to say, look, this is what you promised to support the developing countries, but now we have received this little or this less, and this is how much we need. So it is really important for us to get encouraged to ensure that we make this sort of mandatory at our level. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is just a contribution. Thank you, Irene. Yes, I can see other contributions in the chat. Yes, someone, Andrew, NDC Partnership is asking from Seychelles, is there a difference between the... Oh, okay. Is there a difference between the National Inventory Report for National Communication, BUR and BTR? I think there's no difference. That's why in the presentation I was showing that it's usually an annex to the reports, the main reports. Yeah.
Just to become into the inventory report or the inventory requirements are more enhanced in the BTR. So there are more requirements for that. So they are different. It's more complicated, so to say, to do the NRI and the inventory in the BTR.
Okay, thank you. So I can see Samuel's hand up. Kindly, the floor is yours. Samuel.
Yes, thank you very much, Sheila, for such an excellent presentation. My name is Samuel from South Africa. My question is, yes, as we put effort, to transition to the new reporting framework on climate finance, we observe, however, that there are other, a parallel stream of work ongoing related to this. In particular, for example, work done by the Standing Committee on Finance under the UNFCCC regarding, the definition of climate finance. I'm asking this question because I actually I'm trying to understand, for example, how are we going to find alignment down the way in terms of adopting a common definition on climate finance? I know that there are countries, for example, that define climate finance based on international definition, which normally is called Tier 1 approach. The others, for example, like in our case, in South Africa, we define climate finance as informed by the National Climate Change Policy and also as aligned to the NDC. And then in our space, for example, currently we have developed work around finding transitioning to territory in terms of tracking climate finance, where we will be informed by parallel work done on these issues. So my question is basically how are we going to not how per se, but what is the process at this stage in terms of finding common understanding on how we define climate finance, which definitely this will affect how we track and inform data collection as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that question. I think it remains a question for all of us. How do we actually approach that as part of the process to fulfill the requirements? And I think maybe Susan has something to say, but I think for me it remains a gap in as part of the reporting process. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samuel, for highlighting these different processes going on under the UNFCCC. Yes, there is the wish or the approach to find a common climate finance definition. I think it's a longer term process. I don't think it will come tomorrow, and we already know that the BTR is due next year. So it relies on countries to define themselves to what they consider as climate finance. Every country is taking a different approach, a different definition, but it's basically up to every country to do this national exercise. Conduct stakeholder consultations and find a common definition of what is considered climate finance in the country, also of what is considered adaptation, what is considered mitigation. So this is all unfortunately still with for every country to do so. But I hope that one day we will have at least an internationally agreed climate finance definition. But up to now, it's a national process, and each country has to decide that for themselves how they do it, how they define it, and also how they track it. Some countries just basically use the Rio markers. Some countries define their own methodology, their own weightings of different projects and climate finance. So it's diffuse right now. It's a mess. There's no, unfortunately, not like a single handbook like as we have for the IPCC guidelines for the inventory. So it's messy for the climate finance. But thanks for pointing this out. It's a very important discussion.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that elaboration. And I think South Africa is on the right track based on the guidance that you have provided. And thank you for bringing that as a point of discussion. Maybe we need to start discussing such kind of inform the ongoing global processes so that maybe it can be very easy for us to report on such. So do we have any other questions, or we can listen from Ghana? So Hilary or Daniel, the floor is yours. Yeah.
I don't know. I can start. Or...
Yes, it's okay. Start.
So, I don't know. Sheila, you are loading the presentation, or I share from mine. Can you hear me?
Hilary, are you there?
Okay. So, you can share my presentation, please.
Hello.
Okay, starting shortly, please.
are you there?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So my name is Hilary Korir. I work with the National Treasury, the Republic of Kenya. I work on climate finance related actions. For Kenya, the National Treasury is also the NDA for the Green Climate Fund. So we coordinate climate finance related actions, including mobilization of resources, of course, working with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry on matters to do with climate change and so on. So I'll take us through. I'll try to summarize as much as possible. Of course, Kenya, we've made some significant steps in the climate change space with relevant policies, laws, and regulations having put in place from the year 2010 up to recently. And one of the key milestones was in 2016 when we had the national the Climate Change Act, and of course in 2018 when we had the National Policy on Climate Finance. And this is the policy that actually provides for the tracking and reporting of climate finance in Kenya. The Climate Change Act also provides for that. And it provides that we are supposed to report as a country, not only because of the international obligations, but also for our own requirements as a nation. So next slide, please. This is basically to mention that in terms of climate finance mobilization in Kenya, as per NDC, updated NDC of 2020, we require at least 62 billion US dollars to actually implement our NDC from the year 2020 to 2030. This is because of the significant climate change impacts, and I don't want to go into science and the different impacts of climate change at the country level. But out of these resources, more than 70% is actually supposed to be channeled towards adaptation related actions. So, and that one gives us probably one of the key mandate and a key objective as a nation to be able to track the flows of climate finance in the country. Next slide. So several countries have done the tracking and reporting of climate finance. Others have done the CPPR, others have done the tagging, others have done the landscape reports. So for Kenya, we've done the landscape report, which was a report released in 2021. We've also been able to develop some building blocks for the tagging process of climate finance. It's not yet operational or effective, but we've done some significant work towards enhancing operationalization of the tagging or the coding system for climate finance. Next slide. So, but as you mentioned, and I think Sheila mentioned, why we need probably just to provide us with a background is why do we do this one? Because of course, the Article 13, we also mentioned the Climate Change Act of 2016. If you see Section 25(9) of our Climate Change Act actually provides for the tracking. Our National Policy on Climate Finance also provides for the tracking of climate finance. Secondly is that, of course, with the tracking, with the climate finance data, we can be able to make informed decisions and also be able to develop programs with a climate lens at the national level. Next slide. Probably next again. So what has been our journey for us as a country in terms of tracking and reporting of climate finance? We started our journey in the year 2015 when we developed the climate change budget coding report. This is a report that provided with some codes to enable the tracking of climate finance within the government system, because there is a way in which the government does its budgeting. There is a financial information system in place. So there was a need to utilize that platform and develop some climate change codes so that we be able to utilize that system to be able to track climate finance related expenditures within the within the budget in the budgetary process. So those codes were developed in the year 2015, and they were developed, and the proposal was for them to be incorporated within the government standard chart of accounts. A standard chart of accounts, these are the accounts of all government budgetary process of expenditures and items. So these codes were supposed to be incorporated within that system to enable the tracking and reporting of climate finance. After that, in 2016, we piloted the climate public expenditure and budget review process with some few sectors and also some few subnational governments. So that was more of our first report in terms of trying to report on the climate finance and climate-related expenditures at the country level. It was not a big report, but it was touching on some few sectors, some key sectors. That was energy, industrialization, agriculture was there, ICT, and other sectors. Thirdly is that the codes that were proposed in the report of 2015 have now been incorporated in the government is revising the standard chart of accounts. We've incorporated those codes in that revision. And once that one is finalized, we can be able to track climate finance flows automatically within the system. Next slide, please. Back. Thank you. Go back again, please. Go back again. Go back one step. Yeah. So and the fourth item is a training handbook. In 2020, we realized that the provision of climate data, even within the government system, it will not be probably a function of climate change specialists or climate change officers within the different government system, but it will be the finance officers, it will be the budget officers, it will be the economists who are doing planning process. So we decided to develop a training handbook to enable these officers to understand what we are doing, why we are tracking this one, and so on. And then in 2020, the Minister of Finance issued a circular which mandated the reporting of climate finance flows and climate finance related expenditures in the country. And of course, 2021, we developed a report, the National Climate Finance Landscape Report. And in currently, we are actually developing a climate finance information system. And this one is to bring out the non-state actors, because there are a lot of climate finance flows which the codes that we had proposed will not be able to capture. But there are a lot of finances outside the government system that we need to capture it. So we are proposing another all-inclusive information system that will enable us to be able to report and to actually analyze data on climate finance and so on. So it's an ongoing process. We are at the conceptualization stage. Next. Next slide, please.
Go to the next slide, please.
Okay, so I think there was a slide before that. So how are we proposing, or how are we trying to do the tracking and reporting of climate finance in Kenya? And how are the codes, even the codes that we proposed, are conceptualized? We utilize the Rio markers in terms of, because our interest is not only to track climate change, just say climate change, but how if a project has climate change related expenditures, does it have adaptation-related expenditures or mitigation-related expenditures, or some enabling environment or resources were utilized in terms of developing necessary policies or capacity building initiatives? And if it is a climate change adaptation project, was it a significant adaptation project or was it just a principal adaptation project? So we use the real markers, which I don't want to go into details. Either is it a significant marker or a principal marker. Next slide. And this is the screening tool that we are utilizing, of course, also from the real markers, and on how we determine whether an activity or an action was significant, principal, or whether there was no cost tracked. Next slide. So, but in terms of the costing also, and this is where probably there is some limitations in terms of the accuracy of the data, is that some projects are not exclusively climate change related projects. Some projects are midway. Some projects have co-benefits, climate change co-benefits. Some projects were designed as just the normal development projects, but they have climate change related expenditures within the property, a component of it, or an action or an activity within the entire project that is related to climate change. So of course, we also utilized some of the principles that were outlined in the Rio markers. And if a project has more than 65% of the budget allocated to climate change activity, then it was a principle-related climate change activity. And if it is between 25 to 65% of the entire budget, then it was significant. That means while the project was not entirely designed as a climate change project, but it has some climate change elements within it, so we considered it as a significant. But if a project has less than 25% of its budget, then we decided that there is no cost tracked out of that one. It's not a climate change, probably it's just the normal development expenditures. And I'll highlight later on the challenges probably related to these ones. Next slide. So how are we capturing these expenditures within the IFMI system? Of course, our Public Finance Management Act defines the standard chart of accounts that I've already mentioned. We've redesigned the IFMI system in 2012 so that it incorporates some wider reforms in the government system. And the way in which we are trying to operationalize, if you move to the next slide, is that the current system has 7 segments. So if you want to track expenditures within the government system, those are the segments which are there. So segment 1, whether it was a class, or is it a current expenditure or a development expenditure? What is the vote? Was it the vote of the Ministry of Environment, a vote of the National Treasury, the administrative, the source of funding, the program, the economic item, the geographical location, and then there was a spare segment. This is the segment that we planned. And in 2015, that report that I mentioned proposed that we utilize that one as an analytical segment for us to be able to track climate finance related expenditures. And if you move to the next slide, you will see how it is. So this is just details of what I've highlighted. Next slide. So this is how probably a project in Kenya, and this is an example of a climate smart agriculture project in Kenya is. So it's a development expenditure. It's a project under the State Department for Crops. And then, of course, the source of funding was the government of Kenya. And then there's the programmatic, the economic item, the geographic location. And then the future segment, which was the spare segment, is the one that we wanted to utilize now to say, if this economic item of the purchase of seeds or the program, was it a climate change? But of course, for this one, it's a good example because it's climate smart agriculture project. If it was another project, now is to define whether it is it a climate change project? And if it's a climate change project, was it an adaptation related project or a mitigation related project, so that we can be able to actually disaggregate the information further. So next slide, please. So, and that is how we proposed the 8th segment as one of the analytical segment, which could be able to track climate change Other institutions have also expressed interest in terms of tracking gender expenditures. Others are tracking nutrition-related expenditures in the government budgetary process and so on. So this is the segment that we propose to utilize, and we develop codes, the 4 digits code for that segment. Next slide. I don't want to move into a lot of details, but you could move also to the next slide. So, and this is previous one. And this is, sorry. The next slide, please. So in our analytical segment, so we were given code 1 by the government. Code number 1 to be able to track climate change related expenditures in the analytical segment. Gender was given code number 2. And I think disasters were given code number 3 or so. So, but we are moving from climate change and then to the second level, which is adaptation or mitigation or cross-cutting or just enablers. And then level 3 is whether it is a principal climate change adaptation project or a significant climate change mitigation or adaptation project and so on. So that is how we unpacked that segment. Next is how more of an illustration of how it happens and how the codes will look like. So as I mentioned, code number 1 in the first level is climate change. Code number 2 is whether it is adaptation or mitigation, and then level number 3 is whether it is adaptation, it's significant or principal climate change related project. So this is just an illustration. But in 2021, we developed, based on the work that we've been undertaking in terms of trying to map climate finance flows, we developed more of our first comprehensive report on climate-related expenditures. The report is there online. It can be accessed. We work with Climate Policy Initiative in terms of generating our first landscape report as a country. And the landscape report, it's a big document. It provides information on the climate finance flows in the country in terms of where this money is coming from, which projects did these resources go through. And for us to generate this data, we were able to track more than 700 and something projects in Kenya, implemented by both the national government, the sub-national government, the government agencies, the private sector, and also some civil society organizations. We tracked all the climate finance flows. But before you move, there is, so this was, for example, in 2018, that was the total climate finance flows, 243 billion Kenya shillings. If you use an exchange rate of 1 to 100, that is almost $2.4 billion US. And you could see from the right-hand side is from the sources. Whether it was, the source was government revenues. SAGAs these are resources that go to semi-autonomous government agencies or authorities. And then there are bilaterals and donors, multilaterals, the Kenyan banks, the Kenya private sector institution, and international investors. And in terms of the instruments in which those finances were able to be provided. And then in terms of the uses of those climate finance, whether they were going to mitigation or adaptation related actions. And in terms of whether in which sectors were these resources used. And this is as per our National Climate Change Action Plan sectors. We have 7 sectors. One is on disaster risk management, focusing on floods and drought. We have water and blue economy. We have transport. We have forestry, wildlife, tourism and nutrition security. We have health, sanitation and human settlement. We have manufacturing, and we have energy. And from our data, we saw that energy was actually one of the biggest beneficiaries. Probably the reason is because energy projects are capital intensive in nature. Kenya has big potential in terms of geothermal, and there are a lot of investments actually happening over the years in the geothermal sector in terms of the solar projects that have been undertaken in Kenya, and also the wind energy projects that have been undertaken in Kenya. So most of the resources actually went to mitigation related projects. But as I mentioned earlier, is that as per our NDC, our priorities is adaptation. So with this report and with this information, with this data, we can be able to make informed decisions as a country and to be able to determine how and where the resources should be going, where are the gaps, and where we should be addressing more as we develop our future plans as a country. Next slide, please. So that report is available. It's very detailed in terms of the scope and also documenting in terms of the spending by governments, the resource mobilization by the government, and also focusing on the non-state actors and the private sector institutions in the country. We are planning to do the second report this year, so that we focus on the financial year 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. Because those are the data that could most of the institutions have audited the data for those years. But probably to conclude in terms of the challenges, and probably highlight some of the opportunities in terms of tracking climate finance. One is that for us as a country, we are still doing, even with all those work, we are still doing them manually because the system is not yet operationalized in the IFMI system. The government, as I mentioned, is revising the standard chart of accounts. And that means there has to, all the accountants, all the finance officers in government have to be trained because of the new proposals. So that is something that we look forward to. Another issue is in terms of data limitations on availability, completeness, and also robustness of data, and mostly for private sector actors. You approach some private sector actors in terms of provision of data, other data are confidential, other data might not be comprehensive enough as you like. For government agencies, you can get the data in whichever format you want, because of course, the way government, even with our circular that we issued, most government agencies, almost 99% reported on their or provided us with the information. But the challenge is on the private sector entities, the non-state actors, and also some and several other institutions, foundations, and so on. And the third probably challenge in terms of tracking that probably from our end as Kenya is, of course, the manual identification might be prone to over or under reporting of climate related finances and so on, because without sufficient descriptive information, you might not be able to make informed decisions on whether a project, how much actually went to adaptation and mitigation. And of course, that one goes in line with the definition of climate finance and how you've been able, or we've been able as a country to more of domesticate the general definition that we have now. But of course, as you are aware, we don't have a common definition agreed at the UNFCCC level. As I mentioned, is that with the OECD formula in which we are using 65% or 25 to 65%, we decided to use for significant projects, we decided to use 40%. So that is just an estimation. So other projects or other budget, because it will be very difficult to go into the specific budget items. If you are buying a cup, you go to the expenditure of that cup and so on. It will be very detailed because, as I mentioned, we are doing manually. So with that one is probably the estimation might be lower or the estimation might be higher. So that is just some of the analytical, and of course there are capacity challenges, because for you to be able to do the tracking of climate finance, you need systems in place, you need officers who are well informed, and you need training and to capacity build entities, whether it is the government entities or or the non-state actors on the importance of provision of data and the accuracy of how those data should be provided and so on. So thank you. I'm sorry I've taken much time, and that's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really very detailed presentation, and I think we needed to get all the details of bits and pieces on how you are doing it, because I think there are so many experiences that we are going to learn from your presentation as a country. But I was thinking that to just utilize our time better, we can now hear from Ghana. I'm going to project presentation so that we can just go directly to Ghana's presentation. I hope Daniel is here.
Hi, Sheila, I'm here. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are joining from. But I'm happy to share with you our experience in Ghana. So I'll wait. As soon as the slides are up, then I'll comments.
Let me make sure. I hope you can see presentation.
Okay.
Let me know.
Okay. Okay, great. Colleagues, so as you see on your screens, my presentation will cover Ghana's JCAP, and then I will explain what the JCAP is. We'll look at the components, we'll look at the MRV in place for climate finance. We'll look at the tool that is used to track climate finance in Ghana, and then we'll look at the budgeting cycle, as well as look at the EP annual climate finance survey that is conducted yearly. So next slide, please. Okay, so to be able to support Ghana's climate ambitious reporting program, or to be able to support Ghana's climate reporting obligations internationally, a system was set up some 2 decades ago, and the system is known as Ghana's Climate Ambitious Reporting Program, and that is the infrastructure that supports Ghana's climate reporting obligations, and it covers 4 themes. The first one is MRV or GAG. The second one has to look at action. The third one looks at tracking NDC, and then the last one is on support. And because of our conversation today, we would look or we'll dive into support. But as I said, this system allows us to prepare and compile a report timely. And also, it enables us to do domestic disclosure and undertake our international reporting obligation. It supports our technical and policy review processes as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so in setting the context, it has been a gradual but meaningful growth over the past few years. But just to also indicate that it supports government-wide system, and it allows us to be able to deliver quality reports. As I said, this system leverages on the existing workable systems that already existed before the JCAP was set up. Again, it allows us to be capable, and again, we are able to coordinate, and more importantly, it's embedded in the functions of institutions that we have decentralized climate reporting functions to. And subsequent slides will throw more light on this. Again, it enables us to really raise adequate funding to support our activities, even though we still have issues of funding associated with our obligations. Again, as I said, it's a simple system, but it is workable and relies on work quality data, as well as having a capacity development plan in place to support Ghana's reporting obligation. Next slide, please. So as you all know, the purpose of tracking climate finance is obvious, and they have been listed below. But for the purpose of time, I would skip this slide and then move to the subsequent ones. I'm sure in your own spare time you could look at them. But as I said, the MRV for finance is part of Ghana's checkup that I presented from the onset, right? And the idea is to integrate the MRV of finance into the already existing functions that already existed either at the national level, that is, the Ministry of Finance prepares the annual budget for government, and it covers all government programs, right? So we looked at establishing the system on that already existing system, and also, when you already established or when you embed your system in already established ones, you also get buy-in from the political actors. Again, aside that, it ensures that new functions are not perceived to be additional costs, and it's very important to really address this point so that the sectors or those involved in climate reporting that are not central to the EPA would not consider this activity as additional, and also not consider it as an additional cost to implementation. Again, the system or the MRB of Finance is anchored on, or is hinged on, the Ministry of Finance's mandate. And as I said earlier, the Ministry of Finance has been established to really develop Ghana's economic strategy and research, and as well as that, the economic strategy and research division champions this tracking, or the implements the MRV functions associated with climate finance. Next slide, please. Again, to do this, we track. We use a tool that we have developed called the Climatronics, or Climate Film Track, and I'm sure I would share through Sheila the guidance documents, the tool for you to have a look at in terms of how it works. Again, this tool tracks information on climate finance commitments through international budgets or international sources, and then as well as national budgets. Again, in tracking international climate finance commitments from Ghana, we track it using the OECD and then the DGC database of the OECD. And again, we conduct EP annual surveys that we undertake to really come up with finance that is received internationally, that does not come through the Climatronics or the Climate Film Track, because the Climate Film Track only is able to really track government's commitment towards climate activities, either mitigation, adaptation, or both. Right. Again, this information enables us to really track climate finance commitment or government's commitment, either as to what is budgeted, what is spent, or what is expended, and what these various entities or departments or agencies that are under government receive towards commitments, right? Towards climate commitments. And it is embedded in the system that we call the GIFMIS. And it is the Ghana Integrated Financial Management Information Systems that is used by all municipal, metropolitan, district assemblies, as well as all government ministries, departments, and its agencies, right? And you cannot spend outside of this. And this is a tool that allows them to spend. And so the Climate Film Track has been embedded in this system so that we are able to really track government's expenditure towards climate activities. Again, it provides comprehensive data on climate change, relevant budgeting and spending to inform decision-making and also help prioritize our climate investment actions. And as I said, the Ministry of Finance is able to do this because it has a mandate to do that. Again, we also track climate finance that is received from other international sources that are really have central focal points. For example, we speak to the Ministry of Finance, and we're able to track finance receipt through the green or the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, right? Because the Ministry of Finance is the DNA for the GCF. Again, the EPA is the DNA for the GEF, and therefore financial expenditures that are received from the Global Environment Facility is captured through the EPA. Again, the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and Innovation, which is the mother ministry or the parent ministry of the EPA, is the DNA for the Adaptation Fund, and expenditures that come through the AF are tracked through that channel. Next slide, please. Again, as I said, we do this in collaboration. Okay, in tracking climate finance, we see it as an everyday activity, and to be able to do that, you must embed it in the already existing system. The already existing systems work this way. We have the National Development Planning Commission, which is tasked or mandated to track the government's, or they come up with government's development agenda. That's the first step. The second step is that they are also mandated to track the implementation of government's program, policies, and plans, right? And so if they're able to do that, and it's their mandate, we use them to as an anchor to do this with the Ministry of Finance, with support from the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and Innovation, which is the parent ministry of the EPA, and the EPA provides technical support to them. Again, the national M&E system, as I already said, is anchored on the NDPC's mandate, and they have a system called the Annual Progress Reporting system, that, or the APR, that allows all these sectors, all these ministries, department agencies, allows all the metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies to really report the progress of implementation of policy programs and projects of government yearly and annually to the NDPC, right? So this system has been anchored on that system. Again, the NDPC, together with the Ministry of Finance and with support from MESTI as well as the EPA, we have come up with budgeting guidelines, right? That informs, because I mean, if you do not have budget, then you cannot spend anyway, and if it does not form part of your programs or your annual work programs, then you may not be able to actually even spend in the first place. So we see this as a low-hanging point for us to really tap in to track climate finance from the national budget. And so to do that, they have the plan based or planning from the sectors and the MMDAs, really, or the subnational level, really make use of the planning and the budgeting guidelines that has climate indicators, that is climate sensitive, to really prepare their budget. And they do this with the budgeting and planning officers. And as I said, it allows them to really report that. And one key point is the fact that in this climatronics, or in the software that we use in tracking that, it is a system that we always say relies on, or is founded on this principle that we all know, garbage in, garbage out. Because if you do not really key in the right indicators, then you may not be able to really get the right information out. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll share with you some of the constraints, and from which I will share with you the output of some of the information that we get through our MRV systems for tracking climate finance. The first one is that it is difficult to really track finance that is received internationally, because really they come from multiple sources, and especially when you have a lot of them really going to CSOs who are not really covered under the system. But what we do is to try and use the annual EPA surveys, because we have a very good, we have established good relationships or good communication system between the CSOs and us, because they work at the subnational level. And so we use them to really, we use that system to really receive information for the annual surveys. Again, as I said, there's lack of transparency on the slide. There's lack of transparency on reporting on financial support for training and technical assistance. And this is really difficult to really monetize and to monitor as well. And so that's one of the key constraints that we are faced with. Again, as I said earlier, many institutions receive training and technical assistance or support from donors without financial disclosure. Because of this, it is difficult to really track it from the global budget that is really provided through the OECD system. Again, the situation is difficult because, I mean, some institutions may not really provide the accurate data and as well as the funding sources, or may not really disclose what you would want them to. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So this slide, oh, sorry, just this slide is just to give you an overview of the output that we get from our MRV infrastructure under the GCAP. So this is just an extract from the BUR3, or the Biennial Update Report 3, that was submitted to the convention quite recently. Again, between 2016 to date, or 2030, as you all know, to implement Ghana's NDC will require about 9.3 to 15 billion US dollars to be able to implement and achieve the 47 program of actions that are captured in Ghana's NDCs, updated NDC that was submitted in November 2021 to really cover the period of 2020 to 2030. Again, from the EPA annual survey, we also took data from that as well, and the OECD DAC database. We covered about 600 projects from this kind of survey or assessment. And in terms of value, we estimated about 8.8 billion US dollars, but about 1.5 billion was from the oil and gas sector, or was without oil and gas. Again, if you take a look at what was used, or if you look at the bar chart below, it provides the information on the what was really towards adaptation, mitigation, and a combination of adaptation and mitigation from 2015 to 2030, sorry, to 2020, and that is represented in the graph. But in terms of the pie chart that you find on your right-hand side of the screen, you can see that debt instruments presented majority of Ghana's support, right, towards climate obligations. Again, if you take a look at that which was received towards grant, it was 56%, right? So that also is clearly featured in there. What we received from grant or co-financing also represented about 4%, and 2% was targeted towards loans, grant, and then co-financing. And equity and co-financing grants represented 0% because they were really not significant from the survey. So this is just a snapshot of what I have for you on tracking support in Ghana. But just to also add that in doing this, we have also developed the NDC tracking tool to enable us report the expenditures towards our NDC commitment yearly. Again, we also are currently using Article 6 as one of the strategies to achieve the NDCs. And to do that, we are also using information that is captured through the digital infrastructure that has been established to really support Ghana's intentions in Article 6. And that is the Ghana Carbon Registry, and so which serves as a database for Article 6 project, and that would also provide us an opportunity to track finance towards such commitments. So this is what I have for you this morning or afternoon. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you so much, Hilary, for the presentation. I will now open the floor for comments, but I would like to really appreciate that Ghana and Kenya have really done a lot in terms of tracking finances. As you can see, they have been able to develop indicators. They have been able to review documents. For instance, Kenya talked about over 700 project documents that were reviewed, which is quite very big number. And I expect that participants here are present from different countries have some questions, or they need to clarification so that they can be able to take some key points of learning from the colleagues who have just made the presentation. So I'll open the floor for colleagues to share or to air out what they feel about some learning points. And thank you for keeping the chat running. I can see some questions about how is your experience in operationalizing the IFM, the Financial Information Management System in Kenya? And has Kenya done climate budget tagging and coding? So I'll be reading some of the questions. I think I started from the down one. So I will allow Hilary and Daniel and colleagues from the same countries to respond to the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I think the question on how we have our experience in operationalizing the IFMI system, I've responded down there, but I can just clarify is that the IFMI system is fully operational in Kenya. All the budgeting and the spending by government are done through IFMIs for all ministries, for all county governments, and so on, except for some few government agencies that have their own different systems. But of course, they do reporting on when requested to provide data specific on climate related expenditures. So it's fully operational. It's been evolving over time. It's been re-engineered in 2012. Right now, I think they have also made some revisions. So there are different modules of IFMIS that have already happening. And for us to be able to operational the tagging and the tagging process within the system is that we are waiting for the government to finalize the revision of the SCOA, the Standard Chart of Accounts, for those codes to be inbuilt within the system. And that one will enable us to be able to do the automated process of tagging. But of course, we use the same principle in terms of doing the manual tagging. Whether it is to identify is it a climate change mitigation adaptation, we use the same principles. And then the other question by Irene was how we obtain data from the private sector entities or the non-government entities. First is that the Ministry of Finance, that is the National Treasury, issued a circular which mandated all government entities and non-governmental entities to report on related expenditures or how the flows of climate finance within their different institutions. So government entities reported, non-governmental entities reported, whether you are a development partner, you are a private sector entity, you are an NGO, you are a CPO. So we got all manner of reports. Secondly is that for government entities, probably it was 99%. For now, the non-governmental entities, most of them, some of them reported, some of them did not report. But we had a consultant firm in place whom we work together to map entities, and especially because if you are now to look at all the entities, then you will be having a lot of work. So we mapped some potential entities that probably have in the past received climate finance or appearing in different reports, and some big and other medium-sized entities who are probably the climate change or environmental space or doing biodiversity-related actions and so on. And then we did surveys, we collected data from them, and we were able to map them. We also utilized some government or some associations. So for example, in Kenya, we have the Kenya Private Sector Association that is KEPSA. So we got a list of potential institutions there. You go to CSOs, there are umbrella bodies of CSOs. So we were able to map them through them, and then we got their list, and then we went to data collection. So that is how we were able to collect that. But also we utilize secondary data from the OECD, which actually detailed the different projects that are financed by donors and who are the recipients or who are the implementing partners of those projects. So some of them are private sector entities, some of them are other CBOs and NGOs. So we were able to get information from there also and detailed climate-related expenditures from there. So thank you.
Thank you so much for elaborate responses to the comments. I can see a question for Daniel. How does Ghana ensure that there is no conflict of mandate? Yeah, how does Ghana ensure that there is no conflict of mandate between the EPA, Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Finance with respect to reporting on financial aspects?
Okay, so thank you for the question. It's quite simple. Maybe I should have represented more on the components of the GCAP. Under the GCAP, we have roles and mandates, and these roles are performed using either certain instruments. So either we use an MOU or we use the legal instrument that allows the EPA to really perform this function. I said that we really engage these sectors, and their roles are clearly defined and delineated from each other under the GCAP functions, right? So maybe that will also require some time to really educate and properly break it down for you to really appreciate how we separate the roles to avoid confusion and chaos. But another important way to also really avoid chaos is to also clearly anchor your structures on existing structures, right? So their mandates and their activities are already clearly defined out in their mandates already. So when building systems, you really engage them and find low-hanging points to really integrate your system into theirs to allow you to more like how do I even put it, to make your system more efficient and to avoid the chaos that you always want to really prevent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. I can see a question from Susan to Hilary that how much does it cost and how long does it take to prepare such a comprehensive climate finance landscape report? And maybe I will add what levels of capacities do you require to prepare that kind of report as you answer the same question? Yeah, at national level, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So for the first report, the first landscape report, we were supported, of course, by we were implementing a GNI plus readiness project where we had CPI, ECOM, and others. So we worked together in terms of developing that report. That the project was, of course, funded by the German government. So I might not know the specific amounts of that project, but I know we probably spent a lot because it took almost 1 year to be able to pull all the resources together, to be able to generate even the first draft and so on. But also it was also during the COVID period, so it probably might have taken us more time than expected. So, and it was also our first report. So probably as we plan to do the second one, it might take us probably a shorter period of time. So for the subsequent reports, from our side, we have budgeted almost 50 million Kenya shillings, which is almost 500,000 USD. We don't know whether it is sufficient. It might not be sufficient because we are looking at the data for several years. That is 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 20, 21, up to now. And that means it will imply we need a lot of work. We need a firm to be in place to be able to help us. We don't also have officers to be able dedicated to do that work. We are a small unit also doing a lot of other things. So and that one probably answers the question on the capacities that we need. I think we need a team of officers dedicated in terms of doing this reporting because it's not it's not a small exercise. It's an exercise that is very involving. Even if you when you have a consultant in place, you need also officers dedicated in terms of working with those consultants. So I'll talk of in terms of the human capacity, but also in terms of the financial capacity to be able to undertake those exercises and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for responding, because I was imagining the level of capacity. So from your perspective and your experience, have you been able to build capacity for the small units to understand the bits and pieces? Because when you are presenting, I realize that it requires that someone to understand so many aspects, especially the coding, and also I didn't hear you directly involve the other institutions in terms of maybe identifying the climate as smart activities within the different programs. Maybe it was just a presentation, it is done. So how do you actually plan to do that as you plan to do the second report? Because I think the issue of capacity building across the stakeholders to ensure that everyone knows the data to give to supply to you, to provide in time, it is very key if the capacities are well built. But as you respond to that, there are also other questions in the chat for other.
Thank you for that. So capacity is as I mentioned, it's one of the challenges that I actually mentioned because for you to do it's a very technical area. It needs finance officers and accountants who understand the system and how the government does it, budgeting, and how institutions do their budgeting and reporting aspects. So it's not a very easy exercise. So you will need officers to be trained. So we've been, of course, working with our Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to capacity build officers. As I mentioned, we develop a training handbook which introduces officers to the aspects of climate change, and then how we do budgeting for climate change, and how we track and report climate related expenditures or climate finance. So we piloted that one, but of course we had limitation in terms of the resources, so we were unable to scale it up. But what we are doing now is probably we've been engaging partners in terms of trying to see how we can scale up the capacity building efforts. But also is that we are trying to simplify the process by in the circular that was issued, we attached a template. So it's a more of a simplified template on how you need to report. So the person reporting might not need to know all the jargons that I've just talked about. You just need to follow the template, and then it's us now at the National Treasury level, or the people analyzing data. That is where now most of the capacity is needed to be able to synthesize all the data with of course the information that I've just mentioned. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can see John from Liberia. He's asking, thanking you, the presenters and those who have shared information, but he's asking other colleagues, how was the annual climate finance tracking? How was it carried out? Is there any kind of template that has been developed that various institutions filled and submitted, or is there a dedicated person or institution responsible? So this is, he really wants to compare notes from his country and how other countries are doing that. So the floor is open, but I can see another response. I think they were asking, Irene, are you asking Hillary or Samuel from South Africa about how does the country has a strategy for sustainability of data collection without using consultants to map out the data from different actors? So maybe we can also hear from colleagues. I know time is not on our it's not available, so we can see the floor is open. Yes, so Hillary, the question is still yours, but Samuel has a hand up. Samuel, go on, please.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Sheila. Thank you, colleagues, for this helpful presentation. Mine is just to perhaps also share our experience in South Africa. Because basically there are actually a lot of work currently ongoing on issues around climate finance. This is primarily informed by the National Climate Change Policy that advocated for tracking of climate finance to inform both domestic policy making as well as reporting internationally to the UNFCCC process. Well, in terms of tracking climate finance, we have actually institutionalized what we call the National Climate Change Information System. This is a system, actually, this is a national platform for tracking South Africa's transition to lower carbon economy and climate resilient society. The system actually essentially entails the tracking of mitigation, adaptation, as well as climate finance. Under the system, we have what we call the tracking and evaluation portal, which is a specific portal basically for reporting on climate finance, among others. We also developed what we call the Biennial Update Explorer, which is actually an online tool that has identified and actually is institutionalizing indicators. Amongst them, this includes again the climate finance indicators for reporting, in particular to the BUR process. There are other tools as well. We have like for example, the Climate Finance Accelerator tool, which is also helpful. We have undertaken the climate taking exercise project, which has been completed. There's also a project on green taxonomy, which borrowed much from the EU taxonomy framework, which we have also completed. Currently, since there is a whole range of focus on tracking not only climate finance but as well as the just transition finance. This is work which is done under the climate by the Presidential Climate Commission. Part of our work in the department, we form a committee of the technical task team, that help in formulating and institutionalizing the just transition climate finance tracking effort. There is also work under the presidency, which focuses on just energy transition, monitoring and evaluation. So we are supporting that unit in terms of setting up, a monitoring and evaluation system for the ZIP, which also entail climate finance. But currently, because we know that there are new emerging issues that we will need to cater for, we are currently busy developing what we call the National Climate Change Tracking, Climate Finance Tracking Framework. The new revamped framework will include, among others, for example, new emerging issues such as the ETF, and then it will also include issues like the Article 6, reporting framework. So hence we are actually attempting to come up with a holistic approach in terms of tracking climate finance. So these are some of the highlights that are actually happening in South Africa in the area of climate finance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that detailed sharing. And I think there's a lot to pick, which somehow links with what Ghana and Kenya have already shared. I think it's very good that all countries are trying to do something in that direction to ensure that there are systems and institutional frameworks in place to track finances received support received. I would like to share, and if we do not have any other contribution, I can share our Menti, so that we capture the last part. The Mentimeter link is in the chat and the code is on the screen. So I'll be waiting for your responses, but I would like to really thank you for joining this webinar. There's been a lot of learning and cross-learning, and I hope that we shall be able to pick some of experiences, even to engage more in terms of south-to-south learning and developing national frameworks. The Ment link is here in the chat. I'll share again, and the code is also there.
I think it's the wrong Menti you're sharing. I think it's the second presentation, right? That we are now want to share on the Mentimeter. I think there's a new link then also.
I unshare. So are you seeing the screen?
Yes, but I think it's the wrong presentation, right? We have two presentations for the Mentimeter.
Right.
The other one was on. Otherwise, I can also share. Let me know if you have it ready.
So
Do you have it, Sheila, or sure?
yes, I
Okay.
can share.
Okay.
So I can share. Yeah, I can see people have already started answering the question. They are saying, how useful did you find the experiences from Kenya and Ghana? Very useful. We shall give it a few more minutes because we have already exceeded the time. And then we go to maybe the last question about what other areas or topics in the transparency would you like to see in the future webinars? And how much time maybe, because I think we have been exceeding time. How are we doing on time management? And I would like to also to take this opportunity to tell you about our network platform. It's very active. It's on, and we shall be sharing even the reports and the presentations for the different sharing sessions on the network platform. So please stay tuned to see more activities on the platform. Very soon, I will be sharing the in-country activities that we are planning with different countries. And please, we are still receiving the request for support. Some of the support can even be planned for next year. So do not hesitate if you need any support. I have not seen anyone respond to this second question about what other areas or topics in transparency would you like to see in future webinars. I would like to get your views so that we can prepare webinars that can contribute to capacity and learning and sharing experiences to support transparency reporting. Kindly respond to the webinar, to the question. Yeah, thank you. So appropriate institutional arrangement to learn staff government. Yes, we have already conducted a webinar. We'll be sharing a report very soon. the experiences that were shared from Liberia and Zimbabwe about institutional arrangement, but we could also see how we can structure it for better learning and relearning. Yeah. So members, thank you so much for joining the webinar, but I would have expected more topics proposed, but I know time has gone. I wouldn't want really to go beyond the next minutes. I would like to thank you, and please stay tuned to our network platform. There is also a forum discussion where you can drop a topic for discussion, or you get in touch with us on what topic you would want us to discuss. I think it will be more interesting that some of the highlights that have come up from this meeting to be topics for discussion on the forum. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Ghana and Kenya for sharing their experience. Much appreciated, and everyone else. Thanks so much.
But I forgot.
Thank
we
you,
didn't take a
Sheila.
photo. Yeah, thank you. We didn't take a photo. Maybe we can put on our cameras and we take some photo for those who are still around. Yeah. I forgot. Those who are still around, kindly put your cameras and we take a photo. I have taken long without seeing most of you.
How could you forget that?
I don't know how I forget,
The most
and yet I have
important thing.
forgotten some of the good faces. Yes, I can remember. I can see Jarvis. I can see Rogers. I can see Pete. Yes, I can see Michael. I can see Samuel. Yeah. Yes.
Good to see you all.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to see you. So I'm taking the photo. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I think I'll finish taking. Yeah. Thank you so much, and bye bye for now.
Thank you
Let's
so much,
stay tuned for
everyone.
the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.